I'd like to call this meeting of your Newark City Council to order. Autumn, please call the roll.
Mr. Marmee?
Present.
Mr. Rath?
Here.
Mr. Blake?
Here.
Mr. Bub?
Here.
Mr. Koss?
Here.
Mr. Fennell?
Here.
Mr. Frazier?
Here.
Ms. Hall? Here. Mr. Labutus?
Here.
And Mr. Lang?
Present.
We have everyone here this evening. If you please rise for the invocation by Mr. Blake. After Mr. Blake gets done, Ken Crouch with the Boy Scout group is going to lead us in the pledge.
Please bow your heads. Precious Lord, we welcome you into this space. We welcome you into our mind and our heart. Welcome you to lead us, our mind, our will, our emotions, to have the best interests of the citizens of Newark in mind. We thank you for all the many blessings that you've given us and all that you will do in the future. And all this we ask and all this we say. Amen.
Ken, the Boy Scouts are here tonight, I think, to get a merit badge, right? All right. Well, it's up to you. To the flag
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, fellas. Next on the agenda, we have caucus. That's the time for council to discuss anything pertaining to the agenda tonight. Do we have anything? Okay. We'll move on to minutes of our September 3rd, 2019 meeting. Is there a motion to approve those? Motion by Mr. Labutus.
Second.
Second by Mr. Bub. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Both same sign. That passes. Thank you. We have 4 reports this evening from standing committees, one from Finance, one from Service, one from Ways and Means, and one from Capital Improvements. Without objection, those will be received and filed. We have 2 reports this evening from city officials, one from our auditor, Stephen Johnson, the operating report for the period ending August 31st, 2019, and one from Barb Jobs, our city tax administrator, the income tax revenue reports for the period ending July 31st, August 15th, and August 31st, 2019. Without objection, those will be received and filed. We have 1 communication this evening from Roger Loomis, our water administrator, the lien document in the amount of $17,563.20 for past due water and sewer and stormwater bills for the city. Without objection, that'll be received and filed. Next on the agenda, we have 2 comments from citizens. One is now, one is after the legislation. This is not a debate or a question and answer period with council. This is just your opportunity to be heard. If you'd like to speak during this first section, please raise your hand and we'll bring you up in an orderly manner. Who would like to speak this first section? Anyone? We'll start with you. Wayne? Just give us your name and address for the record, if you would, please.
Dwayne Anderson, 914B Empire Drive, Newark, Ohio. First off, I want to thank Representative Cost and Frazier for guiding me to where I could find financial records for people running an office. Secondly, after the last meeting when there was a lot of questions about the fire department and so forth, the next day I made an appointment with the fire chief and he took me right in. We got to talk for a half hour, 45 minutes. He said he always carries his cell phone. He can be reached 24/7. The next is Rotary Park. The part of the park from Granville Street to the freeway. It looks like Home Depot. It needs trim badly, and there's a bunch of trees right after you go underneath the underpass that are hanging over, and you don't even have room for 2 bicycles going each way. Somebody has to stop. You need a tractor with a sickle blade on it because of the steepness of the bank through there. Then the other one is the bridge there at Granville Street. There's a lot of rust and corrosion on the pillars and cross members of that bridge. It needs to be looked at. Thank you.
Thank you. Ma'am? Who else had their hand up? Anyone else for this first section? 1, 2, 3.
Hello,
Vanessa Evans, 22 Summit Street. And I'm about the Bristol on the River, the concert. I came in October last year about the concert. I guess it's the same issues. The loud, the tailgate party, I guess, started at 4, but we were hearing music by 2. You know, if the concert is starting at 6, and 6 hours for a concert is too long. They did shut down at 11:30, but it's too long for a concert at that sound. I want to invite all of you guys to come listen to the concert at my house if you wanted to, because it is extremely loud. Like I said, I talked to the safety director after the meeting in October, and he suggested maybe turning the speakers. So we drove around Beacon and Edgemont and Isabel, down by Brewski's. We looked everywhere trying to find spots, and nowhere is loud as what it is up on Summit Street. My concern is if you are sick, if you're home with the flu, if you're battling sickness, and it was suggested in October that we just leave our house, just leave for the day. We shouldn't have to leave if we're sick and we're not available. There's no car. Why would we have to leave our house to, when this is going in on our neighborhood? And then it was suggested at the last meeting, the lady said that they turned it from 10,000 watts down to 4,000 for the country music. If you can turn it down for that meeting or that concert, then it should be able to go down for other concerts as well. So it's just my concerns and my comments, so I thank you guys.
Thank you. Ma'am?
Is this the time that will be...
Come up here so I can hear you.
Okay. I just want to be sure I was in the right place. Is this the time that we're to speak for the sound ordinance?
Come on up here
Okay.
to the microphone if you would. And then ask me that question again.
Oh, okay.
The answer is yes. Well, yeah, this would be the time.
Okay, all right. I want to be sure there wasn't anything else on the books. Well, I want to thank you for hearing us again. And
Name and address.
Beth Blind, Summit Street. Yeah, I was one of those people I was at home Saturday and I did have the flu. And I thought about leaving, but I thought, no, I'm going to tough it out because I realized sleep wasn't a possibility. So I started driving around the neighborhood and observing what I could observe. And I thought, my goodness, what's happening here is an opportunity for capacity. But what do you want to gain in this capacity? The downtown area has been a great example of building capacity and saying, this is what prosperity looks like. This is what it sounds like with the wonderful sounds coming from the courthouse. And this is what it feels like in building community. And so, but capacity is something that takes time, because what it does is it shifts culture. Just like these young men. I mean, they did not earn their badges overnight. It took time. Okay, it took time. And I'm sure the gentleman, or anyone who's working within city planning, is careful and to make sure that everything is purposed toward the end goal in taking care of the downtown. Newark has had some deficits in the past, for sure, and we just want to. And again, the city's done a great job in trying to shift that culture, but culture again is something that is done over time, with careful planning. And I'm just asking, in considering the end result of this concert venue, is the city aware of what's being sown, what's being planted, what is happening? As I drove around Saturday night, I'm kind of one of the block moms, and as I saw some young men, I was like, hey, what's up? And they're early teens, and about this time the concert, the fellow who was leading the concert was like, it's like, woo, are you drinking? Are you drinking? And the people were like, yeah. And I was watching these teens talk, And he's like, "Are you drinking?" And pretty soon, those guys, they made a beeline for that concert. And then around 11 o'clock, I was in my house and they were dropping, the F-bomb and all kinds of things. I mean, is that the end result? Is that what we want? I mean, a lot of money is deposited. I mean, do we want, I guess what I'm asking is, in creative capacity, it's going to be filled with something. We're going to have an end result. And is that what you want? I mean, we just have to be wise. And I looked at all kinds of noise ordinance policies, and again, at the top of it, and to not be redundant, but was talking about the good neighbor policy. Do what you would yourself like to experience. Is this the experience that you would attain for you and your family? Is this consistency, is this something that you would want to see? I did watch some parties. Some got out of control. Little children were running around unattended. And I just thought, wow, this is the fruit of something that I don't think we need here. I'll be honest with you. It's not about the sound for me. I'm going to be honest. I don't think we need it here. This is not something that is good for our community. That culture is a counterculture that is pushing against something that millions of dollars are being spent to represent Newark. And I don't know if you remember that song they used to play on WNCI, "Now You're in Newark." I mean, I hate that song. But, in Columbus, that's, I hear that. And that's not the way I want my town to be presented. That's not the way I want people to look at us. I'm very grateful for what's happening here and the capacity, the ability to sustain something good. Again, it takes time. But I'd rather push in that direction than in that direction. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. This gentleman in the blue. Is there anyone else over here on this side? I know, besides Dave. Anyone else over here? There was one there. Okay, sure. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm Jeff Molden. I live on Beacon. And I had a wedding to go to Saturday. So I missed the early part of it. I heard it when they were down there doing the sound checks and everything. And we got back in around the house around 9:30, 10 o'clock. And neighbors' lights that's normally off at night, because I sit out on my back porch, when I can. And people's lights that's normally off, there's all kind of them on the street that night, because they ain't going to sleep. I mean, it was just way too loud. And it even got loud even when they was doing the sound checks. I had the Buckeye game on in there, and it was as early as that they were doing the sound checks and everything. And I had to go through and shut the door, because I had the dogs out on the back porch. I had to go through, shut the door, go in and turn the game up, just where I could listen to the Buckeye game, and that was just in doing the sound checks for them. And they're saying it don't start till 6 o'clock. Their tailgating starts at 4. That's way before that. I just think I don't know if somebody's wanting the South End to get ruined by this concert venue where somebody can buy up a bunch of property dirt cheap and move on from there. I'm not sure what it is, but you got one person that owns that venue down there. You got all those neighbors up in there that's complaining. And how can you take one person's saying over the whole neighborhood? I mean, that's all I got to say. It's way too loud, and it's out of an area that needs to be at.
Thank you. Sir? Did both of you want to speak, or just you, Bill?
Pardon? Yeah.
Did you want to speak too? Okay.
Bill Price, South End. I love music. I've been doing it for 53 years, and I don't plan to stop. But when you're home, you should be able to enjoy some peace and relaxation. I mean, everybody, let me ask you, did anybody here come to our neighborhood Saturday night? Anybody?
Actually, yes, there were some, but go ahead. This is not a question and answer thing.
Okay, because I want you to know what we're talking about.
I was there, so I know.
Good. So you heard it?
Yes.
Okay. So you know what we're talking about. It's loud. It's extremely loud. And like I said, I don't want to shut them down because I support music, I support businesses, but just be respectful of all the people that live in the neighborhood. We've been there for years, and we just want to have some peace and relaxation in the evening. That's all. The day is over. Let's go home and relax. Well, you can't do it, especially during that concert. All right? There you go.
Sir?
Jeremy Davies, 19 Summit Street. Okay, at least the concert did end between 11:35 and 11:40 this time, but much like they were talking, the lack of profanity, not quite so with this one. The screaming F-bomb at 11:03 when I'm walking my dog is a bit absurd, but like Bill said, we have a right to peace in our home. You have a right to be able to go to bed and go to sleep. If anyone wants to enjoy the next concert, feel free to come to my yard. I'm on the corner of Second and Summit. You can see the stage from my yard, and everything is pointed directly at 2nd Street. My thought is not only do we need to turn the volume down, but I think at least 11 o'clock shut-off time. We definitely need to rework our noise ordinance so that we have something that's enforceable, and if it's based on decibel meters, then we need to find somebody who can calibrate our decibel meters and some way to tone this down. But everybody says how loud it is. Summit Street's probably the loudest that anybody receives it because it's pointed directly towards us, and I'm sure anybody that drove by there witnessed it, and it was awful. I just think we need an enforceable noise ordinance, and this concert venue should not be in the middle of a residential neighborhood. It's just terrible. But next concert, anybody wants to witness it, feel free to come sit a chair in my yard. That's all I got.
Thank you. Okay.
Change it up a little bit. Dave McElfresh, 153 North 39th Street, Newark, Ohio. Speaking as president of Newark Firefighters Local 109. I worked the last meeting, but I did watch the video, and after several calls, texts, I really felt the need to try to set the record straight. This is regarding the conversation about ordinance 19-18. There were several things said that I can only assume people misspoke, were misinformed, or just didn't quite get the facts right. Additionally, I'm curious as to why this has the emergency clause added. I do not see where this was justified. Usually Mr. Marmee asks why the emergency clause. I did not see that in the minutes or the video. And I believe more time for the community input is important, as well as disclosure of facts. And therefore it should be held for 2 readings. Mr. Blake started asking some questions about the new proposed station. Director Rhodes stated the new station will be full staffed with a medic and a fire truck. Now this is somewhat semantics, but keeping in mind what the definition of full staffed means different things. Per national protection safety standards, a full staffed engine has 4 people, a ladder has 5, a medic has at least 2, preferably 3. The way Newark runs full staffed is 3 on an engine and 2 on a medic. So basing on how we do that, the staff currently as Newark does, 3 on an engine, 2 on a medic, it would take 5 additional personnel to fully staff this new station. They're calling Station 5. So to further expand why that number is important, we currently staff 3 stations with a minimum of 16 people on duty. So if you add another station that is fully staffed, that would take an additional 5, which means you need 21 people. Anything less than that is either not fully staffing or you're cutting from somewhere else at another station to fully staff this new station. Director Rhodes made 2 different statements. He made a comment that we had 4 stations in 2015 with only 72 firefighters. And today we have 79 firefighters with 3 stations. Now, I wasn't quite sure what he was trying to get at, except, we had 4 stations with only 72. Well, I did some checking, and in 2015 we were staffing at 14, which included cross-staffing at the west end, sometimes at the north end, and the east end station was closed most of the time. In fact, I just did a Google search, and the Advocate story, July 23rd, 2016, said Newark's East End Station opened 1 in 4 days. And I quote the Advocate, Connor, who moved into leadership in February of 2015, established a policy to call in firefighters when manpower falls below 14 on duty. When staffing is at 15, there are not enough firefighters at the West End Station to keep all emergency vehicles in service at one time. When 16 are available, 3 of the city's 4 stations are fully staffed. Now, I didn't just take my information based on the Advocate, although that does seem fairly adequate, but I did look up internal memos and what the staffing conversation was, and when we were shutting down the East End and browning out stations and cross-staffing otherwhere. So at that time, and I tried to went chronologically listening to the video, Mr. Marmee said that the majority of runs happen in this district. Well, that kind of hit me because that is not the case. This is not the busiest district, nor is it the second busiest district. It, however, is true that the response times in that area are high and need to be addressed. I have not argued that there isn't a need for that station. There is a need, but there are just other parts of the city also that need covered as well, and we need to deal in accurate information. Downtown is very busy. Our second busiest station is the North End currently, and the West End followed by that. It also became apparent that the reason the administration said they couldn't give an answer on staffing was because they don't know how many firefighters will show up that day. And I paraphrase, that's not verbatim, but they kept referring, well, it depends how many call off. Went as far as Director Baum said, well, the last OSU-Michigan game, 12 firefighters marked off sick. Now, I'm aware that he's already sent an email apologizing for that, and I do appreciate that. I did not get that email. Somebody forwarded it to me. But I'm assuming the director misspoke or was misinformed, because the fact is 6 firefighters took a contractual personal day, 3 were on scheduled unpaid Kelly day, and 2 were on contractual vacation day. That equals 11 off total, and 0 marked off sick. Certainly that is a specific instance of high use of time off, and it does occur occasionally, like any profession or workplace. But that is not the norm. And saying 12 firefighters marked off sick for a football game certainly wrongfully paints our firefighters in a negative light and is completely false. At the Newark Fire Department and most fire departments, there are minimum staffing or a level of service you're expected to provide. When I got hired in 1988, it was 12 or 13. In the 2000s, we negotiated a contract that raised that to 19 minimum in the contract. Until 2010, when we lost that contractual 19 staffing, and then by policy has been cut from anywhere to 16 to 14. We today are currently, by policy of the chief and the city, 16. This is to maintain a certain level of service. Throughout history, we've had to account for employees taking time off in any workplace, and we have a contract that spells that time off, so it's well known. But there is also a known level of service to protect the citizens of Newark, and we know at times overtime is necessary to meet that service. Going forward, Councilman Marmee questioned why Councilman Blake was suddenly concerned about response time at the North End Station when he hadn't, and I'm paraphrasing, hadn't spoken about it during the recent construction, which lengthened response time significantly. And again, I'm aware, if I understand right, the fire chief at the time tried to address that by having a lane open, but it either wasn't cost efficient or just not possible. So there was extended response times. It was a concern. But however, comparing response times because of construction to not actually having staffing at a station is not a fair comparison. Imagine the response times to your area up there in the north end with construction and that station not staffed. Later in the regular council meeting, Mr. Councilman Lang stated, "It has been a transparent process and plenty of time to ask and have questions answered." The questions has been asked over and over, including by me, but there has been no clear direct answer as to how they plan to staff and equip a new station and what impact it will have on areas other than the city. It's always, you'll have to ask the chief. You'll have to ask the chief. I believe there may be a plan, but the administration does not want to disclose it as it does reduce service to other parts of the city. And they refuse to admit that. Let's face it, we've already reduced service to the East End by closing the East End fire and EMS service because we could not afford to staff it. If there is not a clear plan of how we will do this with another new station, then again I ask, why are we building a $3 to $3.5 million fire station if we don't know how we're going to equip it or staff it, and the rest of the city? Transparency is not just allowing questions, it's providing answers to the public. As I stated earlier, to fully staff another station takes 5 more people a day. So there's 3 shifts. So that would mean a minimum of 15 additional personnel would need to be hired. And I say minimum because those 15 also get vacation, time off. So much more than that because we have to provide that service 24/7, 365 days a year. So again, what is the plan? Are you going to hire 15 to 20 more firefighters? If not, where are you going to cut service? You have to. You need 21 to open up a fully staffed station. The public deserves to know. This is an issue that affects the well-being and safety of all residents of Newark. Now, I'm almost done, but I feel the need to clarify one more issue that arose during the last council meeting that I watched and read the minutes to. A question by a member in the audience and by at least one councilman, Councilman Lang, regarding who received union campaign donations. It appeared to me that there was a possible insinuation, as this was the only reason Councilman Blake was concerned for public safety and asking questions. The union has always tried to make an issue of concern for our public clear. We have made it clear we understand and recognize the need for a station in this area, Station 5, but not when you shut down the East End while saying you can't afford to staff it, and it clearly appears you're going to cut somewhere else to open Station 5. You've disclosed no plan to staff, and we haven't even talked much about how you will equip it. As yes, we need more trucks also to put in this additional station. We have consistently asked why you're building new stations when you can't adequately staff and equip what you have. These are public safety issues, not political. So if through a legally organized political action committee that uses firefighters' voluntary contributions, not union dues, we decide to donate that legal PAC money to candidates who share our concerns for public safety, why is that in question? Well, it's fair to ask, but let's also question who's received money from the construction company who gets most of the city's bids for construction, including all the fire stations. The architect who profits from the plans, the bankers who profits from all the buildings and loaning, the foundations and landowners who own all the land and profit from these lands and building deals. I am glad Mr. Cost and Mr. Frazier mentioned looking them up online, because I did, and all the aforementioned people have donated to Mayor Hall and many on this council, who make decisions that have potential to bring them a lot of wealth. But for some reason, we are concerned about the hardworking public servants, our firefighters, giving to folks who desire to help protect public safety. Firefighters have no monetary gain one way or the other for a new fire station. But the contributors to some candidates have had and continue to have great financial gain from their support. Let's just deal on facts and not blame our firefighters. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dave. Okay, we're going to move on. Ordinance is on the first reading, 19-18.
Ordinance 19-18 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Lang, Mr. Cost, Mr. Frazier, Mr. Rath. An ordinance to provide for the issuance of $2,950,000 of bond anticipation notes in anticipation of the issuance of bonds for the purpose of paying the cost of construction Sharon Valley Road Fire Station Number 5, including site preparation and all necessary appurtenances, and declaring an emergency.
You've heard the reading of 19-18. On the first reading, this is emergency. What is your wish?
Mr. President.
Mr. Marmee.
Make a motion to adopt ordinance 19-18.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Marmee.
Second.
Second by Mr. Frazier. Is there any discussion on 19-18?
Mr. President,
Mr.
I'd like to
Fennell?
make a motion to amend to remove the emergency clause for 19-18 to allow for a second reading and more discussion.
I'm
Point
sorry.
of order.
Yes, go ahead.
Emergency clause cannot be removed once it's on. The purpose of the emergency clause in this situation is because bond council requires it.
Mr. Sassen, that's correct.
You can do a motion to amend to remove the emergency
Well, yeah, I'm not saying that, I'm just saying that the motion to amend.
So we can make a motion to amend
Yes,
without any problem?
absolutely.
And I'm sorry, your motion to amend is?
To remove the emergency clause.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Blake. Is there any discussion on the amendment?
Mr. President,
Mr.
again,
Moore.
I'm going to advise council that bond council is who requires the emergency clause in this situation. So it's something that it's on all of our bond issues, including the other three that are on here this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Anyone else?
Mr. President. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think the reason in particular with this is that from what we've heard that there might be benefit in further discussion and allowance for a second reading on this particular ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Real. Mr. Blake, did you have something to add or you go? Autumn, please call the roll on the amendment.
Mr. Marmee,
No.
Mr. Rath,
No.
Mr. Blake,
Yes.
Mr. Bub,
No.
Mr. Cost,
No.
Mr. Fennell,
Yes.
Mr. Frazier,
No.
Ms. Hall,
No.
Mr. Labutus,
No.
Mr. Lang,
No.
Let's go. 8-2.
8-2.
8-2, the amendment fails. We'll go back to any discussion on 19-18. It is an emergency. Is there any discussion, Mr. Blake?
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the ordinance. I first want to say that I agree that we've had a lot of discussion about the response times in the west end of town, and I'm in favor of this project. I think that this is a project that is worthy, that's needed. I think that building is, when I have had conversations with leadership within the Division of Fire and other firefighters, we know that the response time is what actually saves lives. When we're able to get someone from the station to that patient, that's what saves lives. Person having a heart attack, person having a stroke, whatever the medical issue may be, we need to get there as quickly as possible. So I want to make it very clear that I'm not in objection of, we've known for a long time historically that area of town has had long response times. So I just want to reiterate that and make that very clear. Since our last meeting, I have had, and you've all been copied on, an email exchange with myself and the fire chief, and he does admit within his response that it is 21 is the number to be staffed, to be fully staffed, to be able to operate the new fire station and to maintain full service at the other stations. That number is 21. He clearly puts that within his response, at which I'm appreciative of that, because I believe it was over a year ago at where myself, Councilman Fennell, Councilman Ellington, and the community participated in a town hall to discuss this very issue, staffing. It was at OSU Newark, and I thought we had a good discussion. There weren't any solutions from that, but that was the beginning of a public discussion. Since then, there have been many private conversations and, small group meetings and things of that nature, but I think the issue is that this issue has to be public. A committee of this council should be involved in how we're deciding the staffing issue. There needs to be more open discussion about how it is that we're going to spend. This ordinance asks for $2.9 million to borrow, to put on debt to the citizens of Newark to build this station. So this isn't just a simple project. This is a very expensive project. And so they deserve answers as to how exactly are we going to staff this. And so if you just look at the answer that our chief gave me, and saying 21, and then you just look at the other stations, how are we staffing the other 3 stations in our community? Well, we do have 3 on a truck and then 2 on the medic. And so that means that there's 5 for a shift. And so we know that we run a 24/7 fire station, which means that there are 3 shifts, which is your 15 number. So it's not really, I know there's numbers that like to get thrown around to make the issue complex, but it's not as complex as it needs to be. This is something that could be he clearly stated that, and I think it's something that we need to continue discussions on in the future. And those discussions need to be public and on the record so that everyone has the same information and so that everyone is aware of what direction we're going on. Because if we do need, and it does say if we do need 10 more people, not just the 5 SAFER grant positions, but an additional 10 people at minimum, then where is that coming from? Where are we doing that? And ultimately, if we're going to be asked to reduce service in another area of our city, then that needs to come publicly and needs to be stated at least in a public conversation. And so I'm going to urge a no vote on this just because we have no plan for how we're going to staff this building. It is our staff, it is our firefighters and EMS personnel that save the lives. It's not a building that saves lives. And so on the fact of us not having an inclusive public discussion on the staffing issue, I'm not supportive of borrowing $2.9 million on the backs of citizens of Newark. That I'll yield.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. Anyone else?
Mr. President.
Mr. Frazier.
So since we're talking numbers, so we have 6 downtown, we have 5 at Hollander, we have 5 at West Main. When the chief asks the question, we're going to have a fire truck and an EMS unit. The number's going to be 5, that's going to be 21. We currently have about 22 to 23 firefighters on staff per shift with people that are sick, people on vacation, Kelly days. That's what drops that number down to the appropriate level. When it comes to staffing, the number one key to staffing is the contractual obligation set up between the city and the fire department and the firefighters union. And when it comes to that contract being negotiated in the fall of this year and the spring of next year, those contract negotiations are essential to make sure that our staffing is in order. And with sitting down with the firefighters department and the union a couple weeks ago, they brought up great ideas about internship programs and getting young people engaged and bringing them to help with the EMS to provide for their educational credit and also to get them more engaged in the city. And so we're building for the future. So this firefighter, or for this fire station, we know that there's high run times in that area. Everybody says that there's a need. The funding of this is not going to take away staffing at all. They're separate buckets of money. And so when it comes to the auditor that comes forward and says that we can afford this, when it comes to the safety director and the fire chief that says we absolutely need this as well, we're doing what is in the interest of the public good. And when it comes to decisions for each staffing in 2 years with the contract negotiation that has to occur, as well as opportunities for improvement and advancement and not only educating but providing the service that we all look to see, I look forward to the future, and I totally support this, and I think it would be very short-sighted if you did not support this measure. With that, I'll yield.
Thank you, Mr. Frazier. Mr. Lyon.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. We have known for a long time that this is a problematic area of the city. Where we plan to put this fire station is literally in the middle of 3 of our 4 longest response times based on the map that the chief had put together for us back in 2018, which, by the way, is when we started talking about this fire station. So I think it has been a very transparent process. There have been how many council meetings between June of last year and now for people to come and talk to us. Every issue, every time it's come up, there's been opportunities for folks to come and speak on it. We've asked questions. Those questions have been answered. Some of those questions, to me, seem almost deliberately designed where the chief has said, hey, we got to wait till we know about the SAFER grant. We got to wait till we know what the budget looks like. But we're still asking those questions and pretending like, hey, we don't know the answer, so therefore we can't support this. The chief has been very clear. We need to know about the SAFER grants. We need to look at what the budget looks like next year. All numbers that need to be worked out, and the way that you end up covering however many you're going to staff on any given shift depends on what you've got in the budget for overtime and things like that. So I think it's, we sat down with the chief back in April, was the most recent meeting where we asked a lot of these questions, and I sat there with several members who asked questions, and certain council members that did not ask any questions at that meeting, and have decided to wait until now to start asking questions. And I think it, again, as I mentioned in the last meeting, it to me is disingenuous to act now like we haven't had these opportunities and want to delay this further when we have the land, it's been donated, interest rates are at a great spot, and we're in a great position, I think, to finance this at this time. And I guess I did want to address the discussions about the collective bargaining agreement, which came up in the Finance Committee last time around. I think my comment was just an understanding that it would be reasonable to ask who'd received union donations on a night when the CBA, the collective bargaining agreement, is being brought up multiple times when we're about to renegotiate that contract in another month or so. And certainly, yeah, I think it's appropriate to look at donations across the board. I think that's been brought up on past issues before. When we voted on things, people have wanted to know, and so I think it's appropriate to ask those questions, and that's why we make all of our finance reports public and available on the website. So with that, I'll yield.
Thank you, Mr. Lang. Anyone else?
Mr. President.
Anyone else want to speak before Mr. Blake speaks again? Mr. Blake?
Mr. President, thank you again. I think what is disingenuous is to trying to understand that the 5 SAFER grants are going to be able to fulfill a new station. 5 positions, temporary positions, are not going to be able to fully staff a 24/7 fire station. What I think is disingenuous is the idea of thinking that through the next contract negotiations we'll be able to get 10 new positions out of that. That's not true. It's not going to happen. We have to have an open, honest discussion about how we are going to move forward with the staffing and the safety. I mean, building that building is going to be very nice. It's going to be, we have some nice buildings, but it's not going to keep the people safe in that neighborhood. It's the actual personnel that's going to keep the people safe. And so, again, I was the one that pushed for the town hall. I've had conversations with our fire chief. We need public discussions about this, because having behind closed doors discussions is not, I mean, that's nice, but things need to be open in the public. We are a public entity. And so with that, I'll yield.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. Anyone else? Anyone else before I call on Mr. Lang? Mr. Lang.
Yeah, I guess just two quick points. We talk about removing firefighters from Hollander and potentially reducing times. I think when you talk to the chief, he would agree that adding another location in a central location like this in the city is going to have the overall effect of reducing the average response times for the whole city. Even if maybe it's a little longer here, it gets a lot shorter there. When you look at average times for the whole city, which is probably the most important number to look at, it's very likely this is going to reduce, regardless of how many firefighters we have manning those stations. Putting them in a more central location is going to improve our response times overall. And with that, I'll end.
Thank you, Mr. Lang. Anyone else? Autumn, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
No.
Mr. Bum?
Yes.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
Mr. Fennell?
No.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
And Mr. Lang?
Yes.
That passes 8-2. Next, we'll move on to 19-19.
Ordinance 19-19 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Lang, Mr. Frazier, Mr. Cost, and Mr. Rath. An ordinance to provide for the issuance of not to exceed $2,550,000 of bond anticipation notes in anticipation of the issuance of bonds for the purpose of paying the cost of Tamarack 40th Street upgrade stormwater improvements and all necessary appurtenances thereto, and declaring an emergency.
You've heard the first reading of 19-19, but it is an emergency. What is your wish?
Mr. President.
Mr. Marmee.
Make a motion to adopt ordinance 19-19.
Second. Motion by Mr. Marmee, second by Mr. Rath. Is there any discussion on 19-19? Seeing none, I'll please call the roll vote.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Koss.
Yes.
Mr. Fennell?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
And Mr. Lang?
Yes.
19-19 passes 10-0. Next, we have 19-20.
Ordinance 19-20 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Koss, Mr. Rath, Mr. Frazier, an ordinance to provide for the issuance of not to exceed $525,000 of bond anticipation notes in anticipation of the issuance of bonds for the purpose of paying the cost of water system improvements and all necessary appurtenances thereto, and declaring an emergency.
You've heard the first reading of 19-20. This is emergency. What is your wish?
Mr. President.
Mr. Marmee.
Make a motion to adopt ordinance 19-20.
Motion by Mr. Marmee.
Second.
Second by Mr. Frazier. Is there any discussion on 19-20? Seeing none, I'll please call the roll vote.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Koss.
Yes.
Mr. Fennell?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
And Mr. Lang?
Yes.
19-20 passes 10-0. Next, we have 19-21.
Ordinance 19-21 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Frazier, Mr. Koss, Mr. Rath. It's an ordinance consolidating two bond anticipation note issues of the city of Newark, Ohio, and declaring an emergency.
Once again, 19-21 is on its first reading, but it is an emergency. What is your wish?
Mr. President.
Mr. Marmee.
Make a motion to adopt ordinance 19-21.
Motion by Mr. Marmee.
Second.
Second by Mr. Frazier. Is there any discussion on 19-21? Seeing none, I'll please call the roll vote.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Koss.
Yes.
Mr. Fennell?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
And Mr. Lang?
Yes.
19-21 passes 10-0. Next, we go on to 19-22.
Ordinance 19-22 by Mr. Rath, Mr. Koss, Mr. Marmee, Mr. Frazier, an ordinance changing the zoning classification of certain real property generally described as 1435 through 1445 West Main Street, City of Newark, Licking County, Ohio, from that of MFR Multifamily Residence District to MB Medium Intensity Business District, zoning code of the City of Newark, Ohio.
19-22 will be referred to the Planning Commission, and then it will be back to us. Next, 19-23.
Ordinance 19-23 by Mr. Rath, Mr. Marmee, an ordinance changing the zoning classification of certain real property generally described as 680 Wesley Avenue, City of Newark, Licking County, Ohio, from that of RH High Density Single Family Residence District to GO General Office Zoning Code of the City of Newark, Ohio.
And 19-23 will also be referred to the Planning Commission, and then it will be back to us. And finally, we have 19-24.
Ordinance 19-24 by Mr. Rath, Mr. Marmee, and Mr. Frazier, an ordinance changing the zoning classification of certain real property generally described as 176 Mount Vernon Road, City of Newark, Licking County, Ohio, from that of MFR Multifamily Residence District to LC Limited Commercial District, zoning code of the City of Newark, Ohio.
And 19-24 will also be referred to the Planning Commission for their opinion, and will come back to us. Next, we go to resolutions on the second reading, 19-59.
Resolution 19-59 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Koss, Mr. Rath, Mr. Frazier, Mr. Lang, a resolution appropriating monies for the current expenses of the municipal corporation.
You've heard the second reading of 19-59. What is your wish?
Mr. President.
Mr. Marmee.
I make a motion to adopt resolution 19-59.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Marmee, second by Mr. Cost. Is there any discussion on 19-59? Seeing none, I'll please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Koss.
Yes.
Mr. Fennell?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
And Mr. Lang?
Yes.
19-59 passes 10-0. Next, we'll move on to 19-60. On the second reading.
Resolution 1960 by Mr. Rath, Mr. Koss, Mr. Frazier, Mr. Lang, a resolution authorizing the Director of the Public Service to prepare and submit applications to participate in the Ohio Public Works Commission State Capital Improvements Program and to execute contracts as required.
You've heard the second reading of 19-60. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Rapp.
make a motion to adopt 19-60.
Motion by Mr. Rapp.
Second.
Second by Mr. Frazier. Is there any discussion on 19-60? Seeing none, Autumn, please call the roll vote.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rapp?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub? Mr. Cos?
Yes.
Mr. Fennell?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
And Mr. Lang?
Yes.
19-60 passes 10-0. Next on the second reading, we have 19-61.
Resolution 19-61 by Mr. Rath, Mr. Cos, Mr. Marmee, Mr. Lang, Mr. Frazier. A resolution of consent authorizing the Service Director of the City of Newark, Ohio to enter into contract with the Ohio Department of Transportation for replacement guardrail end treatments on the National Highway Systems routes through Newark, State Route 16, State Route 79, and State Route 13.
You've heard the second reading of 19-61. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Rath.
I'd like to make a motion to adopt 19-61.
Motion by Mr. Rath, second by Mr. Cost. Is there any discussion on 19-60? Seeing none, Autumn, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Cos?
Yes.
Mr. Fennell?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
And Mr. Lang?
Yes.
And 19-61 passes 10-0. Now we've got resolutions on the first reading, 19-62.
Resolution 19-62 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Cos, Mr. Frazier, Mr. Rath, a resolution appropriating monies for the current expenses of the municipal corporation.
19-62.
Mr. President?
Mr. Lang.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to adopt 19-62.
To waive the two-day reading rule.
Sorry, waive the two-day reading.
Motion to waive the two-day reading rule by Mr. Lang.
Second.
Second by Mr. Frazier.
Mr. President?
Mr. Lang.
Yeah, this is to correct our lease pay. This is to make lease payments that weren't budgeted for originally, and we need to make that. It's expedited to make those payments.
Thank you, Mr. Lang. Autumn, please call the roll to waive the two-day reading rule.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Cos?
Yes.
Mr. Fennell?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
And Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Two-day reading rule is waived. Mr. Lang.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion. Now I'd like to make a motion to adopt Resolution 19-62.
Motion by Mr. Lang.
Second.
Second by Mr. Frazier. Is there any other discussion on 19-62? Seeing none, Autumn, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Cos?
Yes.
Mr. Fennell?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
And Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Next, we go to the first reading. Oh, that passes 10-0. Sorry. Next, we go to the first reading on 19-63.
Resolution 19-63 by Mr. Cos, Mr. Marmee, Mr. Frazier, and Mr. Rath. It is a resolution accepting the amounts and rates as determined by the Budget Commission and authorizing the necessary tax levies and certifying them to the county auditor and declaring an emergency.
19-63 is on the first reading, but it is an emergency. What is your wish?
Mr. President.
Mr. Marmee.
Make a motion to adopt Resolution 19-63.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Marmee.
Second.
Second by Mr. Frazier. Is there any discussion on 19-63? Seeing none, Autumn, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Cos?
Yes.
Mr. Fennell?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
And Mr. Lang?
Yes.
19-63 passes 10-0. See, the scouts got their money's worth tonight. Next on the first reading, we have 19-64.
Resolution 19-64 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Cos, Mr. Frazier, Mr. Rath, a resolution appropriating and disappropriating monies for the current expenses of the municipal corporation.
19-64.
Mr. President.
Mr. Marmee.
Make a motion to waive the two-day reading rule on Resolution 19-64.
Motion to waive the two-day reading rule by Mr. Marmee.
Second.
Second by Mr. Frazier. You see how well that goes, Mr. Lang? Mr. Marmee.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, these need to be expedited because we have some crucial deadlines to meet, especially with road salt and some other miscellaneous supplies that we have to pay for right away. Otherwise, we lose our opportunity to buy it at a bargain price.
Thank you, Mr. Marmee. Autumn, please call the roll to waive the two-day reading rule.
Oh, Marjorie Frazier. Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Cox?
Yes.
Mr. Fennell?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
And Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Judy, reading rules waived. Mr. Marmee.
Thank you, Mr. President. Make a motion to adopt Resolution 19-64.
Motion by Mr. Marmee.
Second.
Second by Mr. Frazier. Any other discussion on 19-64?
It was a great year. That's the year I was born.
Gosh, mine was much later than that. Anyone else? Anyone else want to fall in on that or let it go? Autumn, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Cox?
Yes.
Mr. Fennell?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Mrs. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
19-64 passes 10-0. Next we go to 19-65.
Resolution 19-65 by Mr. Cost, Mr. Frazier, Mr. Rath, a resolution appropriating monies for the current expenses of the municipal corporation.
19-65 will be held for 2 weeks to a second reading. Next we have, actually, it will be held until October the 7th, to our next council meeting. Next we have 19-66.
Resolution 19-66 by Mr. Rath, Mr. Marmee, Mr. Cost, and Mr. Frazier, a resolution authorizing and directing the Director of Public Service of the City of Newark, Ohio, to enter into contract without competitive bidding for the rebuild and reinstallation of one screening unit at the City of Newark wastewater treatment plant.
19-66 will be held through October 7th, to our next meeting. 19-67, 2 more to go.
Resolution 19-67 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Cost, Mr. Frazier, Mr. Rath, a resolution repealing Resolution 19-33 and amending the distribution and use of net emergency medical transport revenue.
And 19-67 will be held to our next meeting, October 7th. And finally, this evening, we have 19-68.
Resolution 19-68 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Cost, Mr. Frazier, and Mr. Rath, a resolution appropriating monies for the current expenses of the municipal corporation.
And 19-68 will be held to our next meeting, October 7th. And that concludes this legislation tonight. Boy, that didn't take long, did it? Thank you so much for your attention. Next, we have our second opportunity for comments from citizens. Again, the same rules apply, and we have a bunch. So we'll start there. Wait a minute.
My name's Tom Brenner, and I live at 419 South 2nd Street. And it's concerning the concert venue that they had Saturday, September 14th. My backyard connects to that concert venue. Nobody here knows what it sounds like. Nobody. I tried to call everybody. I got a hold of 2. I got a hold of Mark Frazier. I got a hold of D. Hall. Jeremy called me back this afternoon. I'd like to apologize to him if I sounded like I was rude, but I was agitated. But nobody here knows what it's like. I had 2 officers come out. The first one was Officer Jackson. Very polite young man. He was very understanding. The second one was Officer Dickman. Very rude officer. He laughed at me. He also told me when I was sitting there, I told him, I asked him the same thing I asked Officer Jackson. I said, will you go down and ask him to please turn it down? No. I said, why not? I was directed by my chief and my sergeant not to. And then he turned around and looked at me and says, I work for the mayor. Well, he better rephrase that. He works for all the citizens of the people in Newark. He might be directed by the mayor, but he works for us. We pay the taxes. If it wasn't for our taxes, he wouldn't have a job. And I think it's totally uncalled for that they allow a venue like that in the city limits. Why do we have a noise ordinance if it's not respected? So, like Mr. Davies said right there, you want to sit in his front yard? Sit in my backyard, it's closer. And I'll invite any of you there. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, put your hands up again. I'm sorry, we got a little lost there. Ma'am, then the blue, and then you're next.
My name is Melinda. I just got married, so Molden.
That's good that you know that.
And I live on Beacon Road. And forgive me, I get nervous. I'm not good at public speaking. Never have been. Okay, this is also about Roost on the River music venue. This is not comparable to bar music, sports events, or even a normal venue. This is a lot bigger than that. I think they're trying to make it like Legend Valley. We have a quiet neighborhood, excuse me, and a semi-retirement community that we live in. And the fear that we have as homeowners are the decrease of our property value, destruction of property. And what I mean by destruction of property is when the music goes on the bass. It rattles the walls. Pictures, I've had pictures fall off the walls. Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Take your time.
Precious heirlooms, like from deceased loved ones that cannot be replaced, rattling off the shelves. And we should not have to pack those things to accommodate a music venue in our own homes. It's kind of hard to explain. The only way I can explain it is like a jackhammer right outside of your home. You know how a jackhammer just makes everything vibrate in your house? That's what it's like. And even a person running a jackhammer does not run a jackhammer late at night. And we had to tranquilize our dog so she wouldn't freak out from the noise. She's a 16-year-old lab, and I know that's a good age for an old dog. But she shouldn't have to go through that. And I know a lot of people are saying, well, people around Legend Valley have to deal with what Legend Valley does. And my heart goes out to them because I know. But one thing they're not taking under consideration is Legend Valley was built in the 70s in a cornfield. A lot of the homes were built around this venue. Our homes were not built around this venue. We were there. The base is so torturous, and that's the only way I can put it, because it's like torture. I'm afraid that, and I hope and pray to God this does not happen, that a sane person will go crazy and possibly do something that they normally would not do just to stop the torture in their head. The South End residents have a right to a quiet, peaceful night's sleep, and this venue is not wanted in this residential area. The last meeting I stated that I was hesitant about buying a home and moving back to Newark. But I loved our house and the backyard and just the wonderful neighborhood we live in. But I feel like I'm starting to regret that decision. We bought our home 2.5 years ago. And my fear, and I could be wrong, I'm just putting it out there, that the owner of the resident stated at the last meeting that she was only planning 3 concerts because how stressful it is. But the fear that I have is that they will get big enough where they can hire somebody to do the planning and the scheduling and the booking and do more concerts. Because if you go on the website of Roost on the River, when they interviewed them, that's what she stated. She stated that she wants to do as many concerts as possible, local and regional. So that's not fair to us residents if that does happen, because that's going to be a lot more concerts that we're going to have to prepare for. And we should not have to leave our homes And we should not have to prepare like it's doomsday because of a concert venue. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Rochelle Bolin-Smith, 237 Violet Court. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the advocate for an excellent article on the issue of deaths in our community due to drug overdoses the other day. I thought they did a really excellent job on the issue of how our community has a greater loss than a number of other communities that have dealt with it more proactively. It's sort of disappointing news, but it seems to be accurate. The other thing is on the noise control issue. In our ordinance, it specifically says about places of public entertainment that they're supposed to have a warning sign indicating that sound levels within can cause permanent hearing impairment. And that's for the people that go to the concert, not for the people that are living in the community. And I think they should have as much, if not more, rights because they don't have a choice in the matter. All other residents are under the obligations of being quiet within the hours of 9:30 p.m. and 7 a.m. It's clearly stated in our noise ordinance. And yeah, there seems to be an exception for special interest groups. And that seems curious to me that they have more rights than the community. And it also indicates that the Director of Public Safety can grant special variances in accordance to this section. And that's not being disclosed to the public, and I think they have a fair right to knowing whether that's the case, that their interests are being considered less important than the rest of the public. Thank you.
Thank you. Gentleman in the back. Anyone else over here that I missed? Anyone over here on this side? Daniel? One more? Okay, go ahead.
Yes, my name is Robert Evans, and I live on 22 Summit Street, and I am here about the concert also. Have we ever heard of the term disturbing the peace? There was no peace whatsoever. I have to get up at 2:30 in the morning to be at work, to go to work on Sunday mornings. This is religiously every Sunday morning. No matter what, I have to be there. I have no choice unless I'm on vacation. This is how my night went. I'll just give you an example. First off, me and my wife were on the opposite side of my house from where the concert was. We might have been 20 yards apart, and I was having to scream to her to try to talk to her, to have a conversation with her in my own backyard. Also, that night, I'm trying to go to bed at 9 o'clock so I can get somewhat of a decent night's sleep. You want to know how I slept? I had 2 pillows on this side of the head and 2 on this side of my head. And I still could hear the thumping and banging from that music. The windows in my house were rattling. This is ridiculous. To sit and watch TV, like one gentleman said, trying to watch the state game, I was trying to watch TV a little later than that while the concert was actually going on. I usually have it sitting about 9 or 10 on the volume control. I had to have it up to 25 in my living room just so I could hear the TV. Now, I'm begging you, do something about this. Mr. Mayor, I'm pleading to you as the mayor, the leader of this town. We need to do something about this. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Mr. Crawford?
Daniel Crawford, 163 South 2nd Street. I'll try and be brief. So first, obviously I live on South 2nd Street. I don't live very far from where a lot of these people live, but I hadn't really noticed a lot of the concerts up until now, mostly because I work at nights on Saturdays typically. So I would miss, all the fun, I guess if you can call it. But this past Saturday I got off work earlier, and I had my back window open in my house, and I could actually hear the music, and it was relatively loud for me. I thought the music was actually playing in my neighbor's backyard, like off of a radio, and then I realized, no, that's the concert going on. And then it became clear to me, like, how much agony all these other citizens from the South End must be going through. I am someone who supports local businesses. I think that it's great we have exciting things going on in the area. However, I do not think it's terribly wise to have a concert venue in the middle of a residential area. I would definitely invite, for anyone who may be detached from this psychologically, anyone who lives in other parts of town don't have a concert venue, how about we have a concert venue in every part of town and see how well everyone else likes it? Because although it's not disturbing my sleep, it doesn't take much for me to be sympathetic to the concerns of others. And if this was affecting my kids and their ability to sleep for school, I would absolutely be aggravated. So I think it's the concerns of the community should trump any concerns for profit. And that's what we need to look at here, is that yes, we need to try and bring economic activity into the area, but we also want people to enjoy living here. So if we're telling people that they should just leave their house for the duration of a concert, you might as well just tell them not to live in the area. And that's just extremely important, I think, for us to consider. The next issue I wanted to bring up was standing up in solidarity with those who are concerned about this issue of building another fire station without being able to say how we're going to man it or ensure that it's manned. And it absolutely matters how many firefighters we're going to have at each station. I mean, why not just have 20 fire stations, just man them with one person each in a given night? It makes very little sense just to, we want to reduce response times, because lives are at stake. But then we need to have a broader conversation about bringing in more firefighters and truly fully staffing them. And that's a more in-depth conversation that actually asks us to take upon the responsibility upon ourselves to pay more as citizens to provide for these services to be adequate. And thirdly, tomorrow is Constitution Day. And that's something that I trying to bring awareness to a lot of fellow citizens about, because we also, with my group, that we tried to push an initiative 3 years ago, and although it failed, we've taken it upon ourselves to host an annual event that we call Democracy Day that takes place on Constitution Day. So tomorrow at noon at the library downtown in Meeting Room B, from noon to 2, we're going to be hosting this event, and it's to encourage people to look at our democracy, see the importance of our voice, and also assess the fact that our democracy is very much under attack, not just here recent times, but it's been under attack for a long time. And it's going to take all of people working together and recognizing that when we stand together, we have a voice that really cannot be ignored. It's going to take that for us to reinvigorate this democracy and protect it moving forward. So with that, thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Did you have one or two sentences you want to add quickly?
Just one.
Okay, great.
I forgot to mention, it's Rochelle Volan-Smith at 237 Violet Court. I wanted to mention that one of the primary resources in the country over measurement happens to be in Heath. It's on the campus of the Air Force Station. It's called Bionetics. And they're in constant accuracy by definition. So that might be a resource for measuring decibels and training.
Thank you. Any city officials this evening? Did you want to speak?
Yes, please.
Quickly.
Thank you.
Did you have your hand up and I just missed you?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Andrew Swick, known by most as Chewy. Currently staying on the south side of Newark, at the corner of Edgemont and South 2nd Street. I have 2 small children. My wife and I have served as missionaries in Haiti since 2011. And in Haiti, we've had times where we've dealt with concerts similar to what most folks have been talking about here tonight. Now, I'm not saying that the music here was loud, but I went to bed with a glass of milk beside my bed on the nightstand. I woke up with butter. Just like this lady's saying, it shook the entire house, the walls. Butter. You churn butter. At one point, I went to my back door because I heard, and it wasn't someone knocking on my back door, it was literally the vibrations from the music shaking the house. This is very loud, very disturbing of the peace. Are we allowed to use foul language in this room? Okay, so why is foul language allowed to be blasted into my own home? Why is it blasted on our public streets? If it's a serious thing, which I believe it is, and all of you seem to believe it is, maybe a start to this decibel level problem is to cut out the foul language so my children don't have to hear it. Maybe shut down the concert if someone uses that type of language. We don't accept that in Newark. As a group, as a city, we do not accept that. Make that statement. Start with that. We all took a pledge tonight for liberty and justice for all when we stood for the flag. I would suggest that we give the liberty for people to have the concert. We also give justice to the people living in this area, that they can have the quiet, peaceful evening sleep. I believe that's a just thing. I believe this is America. We balance the liberty, we balance the justices. I ask you all to do that. Thank you.
I'll go ahead and just, it's been a long night, but so why the Chewy thing?
Chewbacca from Star Wars. My real name's Andrew. There's lots of Andys. I had long hair.
Okay. Yeah, I guess. All right. Okay. Our Honorable Auditor, Mr. Johnson.
Mr. President, I can't think of anything to add, so
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Our Honorable Law Director.
Thank you, Mr. President. I pass.
Mayor Hall.
I will pass, thank you.
And Mr. Marmon.
Thank you, Mr. President. I need to call a Finance Committee meeting for the 7th. Yes, for the 7th. A lot of different things being discussed tonight. I really do feel for the residents in that area. I completely understand the whole idea of a venue in your neighborhood or something going on in your neighborhood that you don't want. I can tell you there's a couple of issues that happen in my neighborhood that I don't agree with, but it fell within the law. You know, we have multifamily housing with 4 different unrelated individuals in various houses in my neighborhood, and nothing could be done about it. I can hear music at the Trout Club 3 nights a week during the summer months. There's individuals in this room that I believe play there. I can hear it in my neighborhood at my house. I also did not, that wasn't that way when I moved into the house in that neighborhood. That ended up.
Hey. Not your turn. We let you guys speak now. You got it zipped.
Same type of respect that was just displayed is the same type that some of us on council received this weekend from individuals saying that if we have to stay up, so is all of council. We're going to make phone calls all night long. That's not the way we live in Newark. That's not the young lady that says about community. Is that community? Threatening that we're going to call the mayor all night long because if you're going to stay awake, he's going to have to stay awake. These are the messages that we received this weekend. There's other venues that, just because someone doesn't like rock and roll, that doesn't mean that they're bad. Okay, I'm not saying that, different people have different tastes in music. The same folks that played at that venue play at our Midland Theater. The same type of group does. They play at other venues around our community. 31 West brings in bands that are from all around with all different venues. Music is an art, and you may not like what is being said or done, but it is an art of theirs, and it's a form of speech. Property owners have their rights. You all have your rights. We will fight for the things that are within the law. We will work on things that will assist, but we can't do that overnight. We can't change the law where attorneys make it so then we have to have a machine calibrated just prior to using it and just after using it, and that's the only way it's enforceable in law, in the court of law. We can't change that. We can't change everything to satisfy everyone. One person does have a right, just like multiple people have rights. But you also have rights, and we do listen to you, and we are in support of you, whether you think that we are or we aren't. And you can shake your head, sir. It's fine. And you got angry, you got upset at individuals, but we're trying to help. We really are. Can we do it overnight? No, we can't. But can we also shut down the rest of the city in order to conform to this, say that everybody has to shut everything off at 9 o'clock at night? That isn't fair to the rest of the businesses and other venues that happen within our community. It has to be fair, it has to be just. And we can't legislate morals and values either. We can't. We legislate according to what is right and just. And give those of us on council the opportunity to assist, but don't expect it overnight. We talk about patience and things, and we need to be patient. We need to work on things. We indicated when folks came here for the very first time that even if we had an ordinance to put forward, that it still would not have gone through in time for this concert that occurred this last weekend. We told everyone that. There was no way, timing-wise, the way that our legislation goes through council and its procedures, that it could be done in time. Do we want to help? Yes, of course we want to help. Do we want all of you upset about this, and do we want to try to help out? The profanity is unacceptable, I agree. I'm in 100% support of that. That is unacceptable. We were told here I was one of them sitting here, and she said there will be no profanity. I heard that. So yes, that needs to be an answer to. And I want to know the answer to that from her. Okay? So I am in support, but there's only certain things that can be done, and recognize that everybody has rights. We also have to do what's right and just for the entire city and not just for one area, although we have to consider one area too. We really do. So, and don't get angry. It doesn't help anybody. It really doesn't. Threatening council members, threatening, administration and things like that. It doesn't help. It doesn't help the issue. If you really want to work out and work together as a community, then let's not get so angry. And let's try to work together. And with that, I'll pass.
Thank you, Mr. Mormon. Mr. Rath?
Yeah, I received a bunch of phone calls from about the other night as well. In fact, I received 5 phone calls from 2 different people. One of those people that called me 3 times isn't even in the room. The other person that was in the room was, the other person that called me twice was Tom Bruner, who said nobody called him back. And I'm sorry, but on both of the messages that I've still got them on my phone if anybody wants to verify the truth, but he never left his name, never left the phone number, and the number that he called me from was blocked. So there was no hope of ever returning. And actually, I got 6 phone calls. One of them was from one of them was from D-Hall. That was kind of interesting. But, so, you know, I'm compassionate with you guys. I understand. I wouldn't want that in my neighborhood either. But like Mr. Marmee said, and kind of the theme of my comments tonight is there is an executive branch, an administrative branch, and a legislative branch of government, even in the city level, and we are a legislative branch. And why I have people calling me insisting that I do something, I don't know what I could do. On Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening, am I going to convene a special council meeting and throw down on a piece of paper or a piece of legislation and hand it out to everybody, every council member, and then have them vote and pass it through an emergency clause without a public meeting, and take that piece of paper over to the police department, hand it to a police officer, or hand it to the police chief and tell them, here, we just passed this law, go shut them down. No, that's absolutely ludicrous to think that that would happen, or to think that we could possibly do that, or to think that we would do that. When you guys came 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, or whatever, yeah, I think it was 2 weeks ago, I even said at that time, do we need to address the noise ordinance? Yeah, it's old, it's antiquated, it needs to be addressed, absolutely. But I even said at that point in time, if we passed the noise ordinance, if we wanted to push this through, it still wouldn't, and we pushed it through as hard and fast as we could, it still wouldn't have taken effect before the concert Saturday night. There was nothing that a city council member has the power to do to affect last Saturday night's events. None whatsoever. We said that last time you were here, we said it this time. Yet I got threatening and demeaning voicemails that were just shocking to me. So I didn't appreciate that much at all. And it's not very level-headed or mature thinking, the voicemails that I got. I'm not talking about what you guys said here tonight. I understand your complaints. I understand wanting to do something about it. And I think we should address it. I don't know what the right answer to that is, but that is what we do. We take time, we do our research, we look at other ordinances that other municipalities have, we compare that municipality to ours, we compare their success rate and effectiveness to each other to see how we can implement that here. And after we've done our due diligence and done our research and found out what we think might be best for the city of Newark, then we propose and we pass the legislation and we enact it. And sometimes we screw up and we come back and we change it because what we thought was right wasn't right. But that's the process that we go through. We don't go running down on a Saturday night saying, you need to shut this. We can't do that. Not what a city council member does. And we don't have that authority. So I look forward to the discussion on the noise ordinance in the future. I'm sure it'll be a good discussion, an innovative one, at least, and I look forward to it. I always do. So I wanted to talk about a couple of ordinances tonight that we passed that I'm pretty happy about. The first one is 19-18, and that's the monies for the fire station. You know, it amazes me at what people say sometimes. So if you go online at the Board of Elections and you look at the donations of people who have contributed to me, you're not going to find any monies from the FOP or from the firefighters. And according to what Mr. McElfresh tonight said, I haven't received any money from the firefighters union because I don't support the safety forces. He said he wants to support the people who support safety for the people of Newark. That couldn't be further from the truth. Couldn't be further from the truth. There's never been a time where anybody from the fire department or from the police department or any other safety forces have come to this council and asked for something and been able to justify their request, then I voted against that. So when the safety director comes, or when the chief of police comes, or when the fire captain comes and they ask for something, the auditor says that we got the money for it, it makes sense to do this, and those that control the purse strings say it makes sense to do this, I'm 100% in support of that, always have been and always will be. But like I said, this is a legislative branch of the government, not an administrative branch, not an executive branch. So far be it for me to tell our fire chief how he's going to run his office, how he's going to run his business. If I got a problem with the way he's running his business, we're going to go to the safety director, we're going to go to the mayor. If it's a big enough problem, we're going to cause a big enough stink, and we're going to say, we need to replace him. He's not doing a good job. We need to replace him. Still up to them as to whether they would do it or not. But I don't see that happening anytime soon. So when he tells us that we need a new fire station and our response times are low, are long rather, and it's going to create a safer environment to put a fire station in this area and decrease response times when those response times are way out of standards, way out of normal expectancy, then I'm going to support that wholeheartedly. So I'm very glad to have voted yes for that. Also very happy to vote for ordinance 19-19, and that's was for paying for costs for Tamarack 40th Street upgrades and stormwater, the west end of Newark, Cherry Valley Road, 40th Street, and intersection of Cherry Valley and West Main. That's an important intersection and an important entranceway into the city of Newark. There's a lot of people that come off of 16 and come into Newark through the new Thornwood interchange, and it's going to improve that thoroughfare significantly, as well as lend towards future developments in that area, and some great improvements on the west end, and very much looking forward to that. So with that, I don't remember if I called a service committee meeting or not, but I would like to call a service committee meeting for October 7th. And with that, I'll pass.
Thank you, Mr. Rath. Mr. Blake?
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to say thank you to you folks. You know, I live on Gaynor Avenue, and so I know I drove around, you know, went down National Drive and up 2nd Street and over to Summit, and it clearly was. I mean, it was just like unbelievable. I mean, I know Beth was messaging me on Facebook Messenger, like, "Did you make your round yet?" And it's like, "I'm doing it right now," you know. So I appreciate that you are here, and appreciate that you will stay involved. Because I know from the previous meeting, there were some council members said that they're interested in wanting to work on the noise ordinance, and so I would add my name to that, to wanting to work on a noise ordinance. And so, you know, but I understand that people made phone calls and left voicemail messages, but you're upset, you're frustrated, there's emotions there, so I understand that. And part of being a public servant is you have to deal with that, and that's our duty. But I thank you for being here tonight, and for wanting to. I hope that you continue to stay involved, because it's not going to be a quick fix. We're not solving it tonight, but hopefully we can start getting some ideas together and start getting some things drafted and some public discussions, some more public discussions about this issue. So here in this room. So thank you for being here tonight. Since I've been on council, you know, I have supported public safety during my tenure. You know, when we had discussions about staffing related to part-timers, we had a town hall meeting. When we had discussions related to this fire station, we had a town hall meeting. And so I view wanting to expand the discussion to the entire community as important. You know, wanting to get people involved, because this affects all of us. You know, if we build a new station on one end of town, which is wonderful, and as I said earlier, I support, but if it's going to affect the service because you're reducing staffing in another area, that's a concern that needs to be discussed publicly. Those need to be public discussions. And as we move forward with this council and with the construction that was passed tonight, I only hope that one of these committees are involved in a public discussion related to staffing. There is a gap here. The only solution we've heard to this point has been the 5 SAFER grant positions. There's 10 more positions that need to be filled for the fire station. So the chief in our email exchanges said that there's information that points to that there's 10 positions that need to be filled for a 24/7 fire station to be built. So that has to be stressed, and I hope we have public, open discussions about that, because we are the purse strings. City Council is the purse strings. And so that's something that I hope we continue to do. So thank you for being here tonight. I hope you stay involved related to the noise ordinance. And I'm not going to shy away from being supportive of public safety in our community. My interest is wanting to make sure that the citizens of Newark are safe. And if that aligns with any group in our community, then I welcome their alliance. With that, I'll yield.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. Mr. Bubb?
Yes, Mr. President, just one item, 19-59. I want to thank Patrick Moss for his donation to the fire department regarding the PTSD. With that, I'll pass. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bubb. Mr. Cost?
I'd like to thank the South Side citizens for coming this evening. I agree that it's essential that we're willing to take a look at a noise ordinance and see what we can do to make it objective and to be able to make it enforceable. And that is not an easy task, but it will need to be done. It's going to take time and effort to make it so it's fair for everyone throughout the community. And I think it's an important thing to achieve. I also welcome phone calls whenever you'd like to call. I came back to 2 messages, recorded messages at my place of business. I was not at my place of business when those calls were made. But what I would appreciate if someone would leave a name and a phone number so that I can call them back. I'll be glad to do that. I return all my phone calls. I return all my messages. Please feel free to let me know and reach out to me whenever you have a need or a question or a concern. But that'll pass.
Where were you, Mr. Cost?
I was at another noisy place. I was at the Indiana-Ohio State game.
Yeah. Mr. Bunnell?
I guess I'd like to thank everybody for coming in. I think that you're coming out this evening, and for is also what is guiding this conversation. So as we look at, I think it's been made clear from your comments that we need to look at our noise ordinance, and that your comments will be heavily considered, I think, in that conversation. So I appreciate you coming out and sharing. I know it can be kind of intimidating sometimes to come up and speak to people when they can't respond back to you, and that feels a little awkward. So I appreciate you coming out and sharing all that information with you. I would also like to, state that again, I am not opposed to the fire station being built. I just want to make sure that all our fire stations are fully staffed and that they are functioning. And my concern, I guess, as the representative from the 7th Ward, is that the Hollander station would have people taken away from that. And the 7th Ward has some of the oldest houses in the city. And they don't have the same safety provisions set that newer homes do. And I just want to make sure that when we move forward, that we're creating a safer community across the board for the entire community. So I have faith in the fire chief and this body that we will consider that and make these decisions the appropriate way as we move forward. So my no vote tonight was mostly because I really felt that this merited a little bit more of a discussion. I understand that generally with these bonds that they are written to have this emergency in them. However, I felt that in this particular instance, I would have liked to have just had another opportunity for the public to listen and make comments and to have discussion. So with that, we'll leave it.
Thank you, Mr. Purnell. Mr. Frazier?
Mr. President, so I'm going to try to respect the 3-minute time limit that I'm given, but Mr. Donaldson will sure gavel me if I go on too long. And so I want to thank everybody in the South End for coming. Tom, if I would have known that I could go to your house, I would have not driven around and gone to your house and listened to it, but Tom got me in the car, we drove around, we tried to listen to it. When anything is new, it's hard to gauge the noise, right? And so the property owners from up to this point, with the cutoff at 11:30, with getting EMS services there, the sheriff there, it looks like they're moving in the right direction for what needs to happen. I think that there needs to be a review of the noise ordinance. It was written as a residential, it's basically termed as a non-commercial noise ordinance, and so the safety director does have a clause in there as well, but ultimately, if members are going to draft it, I've written 11 pieces or been very involved in 11 pieces of legislation here. And so I know that the first step is putting the pen to the paper. So anybody that's interested, I'd welcome you to write it and we'll see it. But ultimately it takes somebody writing it. So I would really appreciate those that spoke today that said they wanted to be involved to do the task and get involved and try to write something that we can remediate the situation with. And so the other piece on the south end as well is look, there's got to be a delicate balance, right? So the venue is zoned for that. They got the appropriate permits. They're there. The comment about Legend Valley is in 2 weeks from now, Legend Valley is having Lost Lands Festival. Your windows are most likely going to shake. The conversation is not there's people out there knew it was there. It's you're in Newark going to be affected by something at Lost Lands as well. And Chewy, I love the name, and also I've been on the board of Invest Hope for about 10 years now, which is a microfinance institution in Haiti, and I really appreciate the work that you do, and it is the most impoverished country in the Western Hemisphere, and any good that can happen in Haiti is good for the rest of the world. When it comes to the fire station, ultimately it's investing in the future of Newark. So we have a college there, we have about 7 to 11 minute EMS runs up there. According to a presentation, I believe 4 years ago from Mr. McElfresh, about 3 minutes is where you want to get to on a cardiac arrest in order to facilitate breathing and make sure that they have the highest rate of recovery as possible. When we look at those rates and we look at the location, the fire station 4 is in a bad location to respond for the city of Newark. And when it was built with the Longaberger Basket. The Longaberger Basket had 500 employees there. It was built with a TIF. The TIF went defunct. The city had to really incur a lot of cost and opportunity cost by the investment made over there. And so with this fire station being centrally located to be able to respond, it's a good thing for our community. When it comes to the staffing, the SAFER grant is a yearly grant application. I expect more grants to be applied for. I expect as part of union negotiation we'll examine Kelly days and other opportunities to fully staff to 22, 23. Whatever the total number of staffing needs to be. And so I think that it's going to be a cooperative effort between the union and the city if we want to come to some agreement on staffing and to make sure that we do it above board so that everybody is aware and everybody can have the right conversations. When it comes to the fire station, it is absolutely a good thing, a good investment for our community, and I'm 100% behind it. With that, I'll yield.
Thank you, Mr. Frazier. Ms. Hall?
Yes, thank you. I want to thank you too for coming tonight, every one of you. Tom, I got your message. I really think that it's not pointing fingers at council and saying, do something. I think it's what do we do? What can we do? We've got to start this legislation. We've got to redo it. It's going to take some time, and hopefully by the next concert next year, we'll have something in place. And we'd like you to be involved as well. So please come back, let us know your thoughts, and we're gonna work on this. I didn't have to drive around. I live just a couple blocks from you guys, and after about 2 hours, you're anxious, and then you notice that your pets are anxious. What do? You can't leave. I didn't want to leave my house. So my thoughts are with you too, and hopefully we can all get together and get something resolved. My heart goes out to you guys, really. And you're closer to it than me, so. Anyway, thank you for being here. And I also wanted to remind you that this coming Saturday, on a better note, is the Heath Oktoberfest. It's free admission at Davis Shade. Beer garden, food, arts, crafts. There's going to be a kids area. The kids area has inflatables, gladiator balls, face painting, a comedian twice, a ventriloquist twice, 2 shows, and a balloon artist for the kids. That's ongoing from 4 to 10 on this Saturday. So you may want to take that in. It'll be much nicer than last Saturday. With that, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Mr. Labutus. Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank all the Southside residents that came this evening to share your concerns. That's a lot of times how we learn things on council, is when people share concerns with us, whether it be here or via phone, email, whatever the case may be. I did receive a few voicemails on Saturday, but like Mr. Cost, I would ask that if you decide to call and leave me one, that you would leave a number and a name and a number that I could return the call to. There were a couple that did not do that. I did take a drive through the area on Saturday evening. However, I think I might have had the worst timing on council because I went at 8:30, which I understand was in between sessions. Or in between, I think they were taking a stage break at that point. I was like, and I didn't hear much at that point, but that's because I had timing. So give us time to work on this. This is something that we don't want to make a rash judgment on. We don't want to rush the judgment on this. We want something that obviously hopefully can address this issue, but also be fair to others as well, other venues in the city, because whatever we bring forward will affect everyone. So we want to help, just need to be fair to all when we make that decision. Secondly, I'm glad we're able to pass 19-18. I'm supportive of the new fire station. Obviously, we need better response time there. We have a growing campus. There's more housing going there. So we definitely need that. I'm glad that we can support that as well. With that, I will pass.
Thank you, Mr. Labutus. And Mr. Lyon.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. So first, to address the roofs on the river, to echo what everybody else has said already, I do appreciate everyone who came out. I think it's important, and I think I spoke to one person who called me. The other one didn't leave a number, so I think it might have been Mr. Bruner. Please do leave a message. I will get back to you in the future if you do. We spoke about needing to come back. Don't wait till the next concert to come back. I'd say it sounds like there's enough support here. There's several members willing to work on some legislation. I'd say come back, hold us to task. I'm happy to consider whatever my colleagues come up with and work to come up with something. I think it's important that whatever revamping we do can't be overly broad. And really has to be capable of being enforced. I think those are kind of the two goals we should look at as we look to update that. Regarding Ordinance 1918, obviously I'm very much in support of building a fire station over in the 5th Ward. I was really excited that it passed tonight. I was very disappointed that it wasn't unanimous. I trust the chief to tell me what strategically makes the most sense for fighting fires in our community, and I think it's short-sighted not to support a building that's centrally located in an area of growth and when the opportunity presents, which is what we're going to do. It's going to be part of what shapes our community for a long time, so I'm really happy to move forward with that. And then last, I'd like to thank Mr. Koss and Mr. Frazier for joining me. And I'll get this out real quick. We had the opportunity to go and speak to the 3rd graders at Legend Elementary, and I don't know if you can zoom in, Everett, but they were really kind to make us a really nice couple of thank you cards for coming to speak. The class over there, Mrs. Skapik's class, Mrs. Anderson, Mrs. Schneider, and Mrs. Baker, these kids are really engaged. It was really cool sitting down with them. We took them through a mock committee meeting, and then they had their own council meeting. They were dealing with what to do about pizza on Fridays, and we really got them riled up. We had about 12 amendments to these things by the time they made it. I think one measure passed, one failed, but they learned a lot about compromising. Mr. Frazier, I think, did a great job. We had one amendment that wouldn't go through, and he kind of helped to work with the committee to see what folks would support, and they ended up passing it. So it was a really fun time, and so gone to speak a couple times now. Really appreciate them having us every year to come speak with them. It's a lot of fun. Probably my favorite part of the job. With that, I'll pass.
So did you get pizza on Friday or not?
One class did, one class didn't, I think.
Ah, okay.
They wanted sides and dessert.
Yes.
That was what passed.
Well, okay. Yeah, who doesn't want that? I'd like to thank all of you for coming tonight. I'll add my thanks. I was there around 4 o'clock, so I know there was music at 4 o'clock. I was there around Summit and 2nd at 4 o'clock, and it was fairly loud. I drove around, drove down Beacon, drove around, drove over, stopped at the Moose parking lot there. Could hardly hear a thing over there. So I think toward Summit and Second, the speakers have got to be going that way because it was pretty loud about 4 o'clock. Went out again about 11 to get a Frosty. Go ahead. Thank you. I was there from about 11 to 11:15. Again, over on Summit and Second. It didn't seem like it was quite as loud as it was at 4 o'clock. Now, maybe I'm wrong, or maybe my hearing is worse in the later day, but it was loud over that way though. And I got over around the Moose, and the Moose's outside band was louder than the thing. So the speakers have got to be going your way, so maybe there's an adjustment that can be made there too. But again, we would like to do something to help, so we will get working on that. I'm not sure what that's going to be, but we'll try to come up with a solution. Our next meeting is October 7th. Committees start at 5:45. Council will start promptly at 7. Is there a motion to adjourn? Motion by Mr. Cost, second by Mr. Bruce. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Same sign. We're adjourned. Thank you.